Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good Woche, a good week. By Chassidei Chabad, we can also say good Yom Tov, being that it's Hey Tevis, the 5th of Tevis, as we shall discuss shortly. So this program is dedicated to continuing the journey in the life-changing Sefer Tanya. But being that tonight and tomorrow is Hey Tevis, we'll begin by talking about that for a few minutes and then resuming where we are up to in Tanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC, and it's in honor and memory of Rabbi Yosef Alevi Weinberg Olav Hashalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKoyen Katz Olav Hashalom, Rabbi Yael HaKoyen Khan Olav Hashalom. And it's also in schus and merit of Rab Zev Yecheskel HaKoyen and Risha Katz La'erich Yom V'Shanim Tevis for many long, healthy years. As I said, we shall begin with Hey Tevis, the 5th of Tevis. So in the year Tov Shemem Zayin, which is 38 years ago, there came out a psak, a court order, Judge Sifton, in the legal secular courts in the United States, that ruled on a court case that the organization of Agudas Chassidei Chabad, which is the organ, the body of all Chassidei Chabad, brought against an individual, a grandson of the Frierdiker Rebbe, who had taken, in an unauthorized way, books from the library, the Frierdiker Rebbe's library, we call it Agudas Chassidei Chabad library, and sold them privately, as if it was his own inheritance. And he claimed that it's his personal inheritance. So it went to court, and on the 5th of Tevis, it was resolved that Agudas Chabad won the case. There were afterwards appeals. The bottom line is, they won the case outright, and ever since this has become a day, as the Rebbe writes in a footnote in several places, a day that the federal court system was established, that the library of Agudas Chassidei Chabad belongs not to Agudas Chassidei Chabad, to the body of Chassidim. At the time, we're talking now 38 years ago, it was a big simcha, which followed, of course, tremendous aggravation. But being that it's somewhat mysterious to some people, what exactly was the fight about? And what exactly was the victory about? You know, if you say it's a personal battle between families, who owns the inheritance, then okay, fine, the Rebbe won. But why is it something that became established every year, Hey Tevis? So you have to understand more of the history behind it and the real inner story, which is a lesson for all of us. And that is essentially the battle over what is Torah, what is Yiddishkeit, what is Chassidus. Just to put it in very balabatish and practical terms. Imagine the children of Moshe Rabbeinu, or his grandchildren, came along and said, the Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu delivered to the Jewish people from Hashem belongs to us, being that we are his Yarshim, his legal heirs, so it belongs to us, and you have to pay us royalties, or whatever it is. What would be the response? Response is the Torah doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs to God. It doesn't belong to Moshe. It's not private property. As a matter of fact, the Medrash says, why was the Torah, one of the reasons the Torah was given in the Midbar and wilderness, not in a beautiful city, to preempt this argument. Because a Midbar is in Halacha, a Mokim Hefker. It's no man's land. Nobody lives in a Midbar. So nobody can lay claim. If you lose an Aveda, you lose a Metzia, you lose something in a wilderness, in a desert, no one can lay claim. In a city, people live in a city, so it belongs to someone. So it's to emphasize that the Torah belongs to everyone, and nobody can lay claim over it. I was given through Moshe Rabbeinu. He's the Shliach of Hashem to deliver the Torah. So in a way, the same question you can say regarding Hey Tevis resolved that question. Here there was a Frierdiker Rebbe, had a massive library of all types of books. And these books were very much part of his leadership. So it's not just a question of who paid for the books. It's a question of what a Rebbe really is. And one of the key lines which the judge Sifton, a non-Jewish judge, which in a way even makes it even more pelagic, even more amazing that he came to this, was a line from the Rebbetzin when she was asked in her deposition, the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka, the Rebbe's wife. In her deposition, she was asked by the lawyers, so who do the books belong to? Your father or the Chassidim? And her response was fascinating. She said, my father himself belonged to the Chassidim. Which means that here you have an individual that's not a private citizen. Because everybody has a certain privacy, has property, has a home, has furniture, has other belongings. But when it comes to a Rebbe, his whole metzius, his whole existence, is for his Chassidim. So therefore his books are also for the Chassidim. So what is the real key to the whole Hey Tevis is the nitzchis of Anasi. Had God forbid the other side won, then you can make the argument, you know what, all his books are private inheritance, just as he was a private citizen. And now it can be divided by the heirs, and they can sell it all. But the Sfarim were very much part of what a Rebbe is. That's why the Frierdiker Rebbe was Moshe Nefesh, and the Rebbe emphasized during that time how he wouldn't leave Russia, Soviet Union, without his books. Because anon nafshik sovis Yehovis. Just like it says by Hashem that he instilled his very soul in the Torah that he gave us. Anochi is the Rosh Tevis, Anochi Hashem Lekecha, anon nafshik sovis Yehovis. Think tzaddikim deim lebeirim, tzaddikim also do the same. And furthermore, the books they use, even not the books that they wrote, is all part of their Rabbeistve. The Rebbe then in Tav Shemem Zayin Vayikra, Shabbos Pasha Vayikra, spoke about how not just the Rebbe but his chafetzim, the very items that he used, his kedusha leizazim came, and the kedusha always remains. So that was the question: is the Rebbe just another private citizen? And when he passes away, therefore everything stops. And that was one of the arguments, that a good Chassidus Chabad is not active anymore. And the Rebbe made it very clear. On the contrary, we have to learn from the fact that we were challenged that way to show how active we are, by increasing more Torah and more Aveda and more learning Torah and more printing of books. So in other words, Hey Tevis is a celebration not about a victory over a family member. It's a celebration of the eternity of a Rebbe and his Sfarim, and that Chassidim live forever. Ma'azari b'chaim afu b'chaim. As I said, again, to appreciate something, you have to look at something as if it would have been if we didn't have it. If the other side had won, then essentially you can say it all ended after the sixth generation, and now the books belong to the private property of the heirs. But that's not what the story is. Chassidus continues, Chassidim continue. So it's Sibur ein a mess. So really, it was established in a federal court for the first time, that fact. Up till then, it's a ruchnistic concept, halachic concept. But now in a federal court, it was acceptable as Judge Sifton writes in his judgment, in his ruling. He writes that there was a time when Chassidim and the Rebbe were so bound together back in Russia. There was no question, there was no legal question, what is the relationship between a Rebbe, Chassidim, and the Rebbe's belongings, his books. It was just that deep trust. But the Frierdiker Rebbe, in his wisdom, when he came to America, realized we have to establish a legal basis for this. So the question is, what is the legal relationship between a Rebbe and Chassidim? So on one hand, you could argue the Rebbe is the caretaker. Obviously, that's not the case, but you could argue that he's the caretaker, the administrator. The Chassidim trust him, but they give him the money to buy the books, so therefore the books belong to them. But as Sifton points out, that's not the case. The Chassidim trust the Rebbe implicitly. He's not just a caretaker, he's a Rebbe. And he could do whatever he wants, even though they gave him the money. He could do whatever he wants. He wants to give the books away to someone, that's his right. On the other hand, you could argue he's a private citizen, like the other side argued, the defendant argued, and therefore the books belong to the heirs. And Sifton came up with a third option. No. A Rebbe himself belongs to Chassidim, as the Rebbetzin said. So therefore the books belong to Chassidim. Not because they paid for it and the Rebbe didn't buy it with his own money, so to speak. It's because the very body of the Rebbe, the very existence of the Rebbe, and what he represents, and his books, is an eternal heritage of the public. Just like the Torah is the eternal heritage of Moshe Rabbeinu, of Hashem, given to us through Moshe Rabbeinu. And when we say Zichar Teres Moshe Avdi, Shenikras al Shmei, it's not because it belongs to him personally, it's because he was Moshe Nefesh for it. So therefore he became a channel for Torah. And he indeed was Hashem's Shliach. What does it mean to us? It means that there's an eternity to Torah Nitzchis, and now eternity to Torah's Chabad, Chassidus Chabad, and Si Chabad. And it doesn't end just because a person passes away. Because Mazari B'chaim, Afu B'chaim. His children continue on, so he also continues on. And that's what Hey Tabers represents. In many ways, the lesson is even more relevant today than it was then, 38 years ago, after Gimel Tammuz. Because now you could ask the question, the Rebbe is physically not here. But that's physically. What he represents. Kedusha Le'Zazmim came, he lives on. It lives on through us, through the Chassidim. So when we learn Torah, and we learn Chassidus, and we learn Tanya, and we learn the Maimorim, and we learn everything in these books, in these Sfarim, that's how we make it live on. Mazari B'chaim, Afu B'chaim. So it's a tremendous lesson in life, that even though in this world, where people have private property and private possessions, and even according to Torah, that's legitimate. Besides the Levim, the Jewish people, Yisraelim, are able to own property. Yet there is a concept of a Rebbe, and Chassidus, and Torah, that is not a private person's inheritance. No one's inheritance. The Rebbe didn't argue, I'm the heir, not you. There's no such thing as an heir in that sense. The Rebbe's right to it, so to speak, is because he represents the Chassidim. And the Chassidim continue on. As the Rebbe once said, the Yud Aleph Nisan Tov Shem Mem Hey. He gave the example, he said, what a Rebbe is, he gave the example of a Rav who was hired in a town. And he happened to be many miles, but he happened to be short physically. So some people said, it doesn't pass, it's not fitting for such a distinguished town to have a rabbi that's short. And the rabbi responded, the person may be small, but the benkel is grace. The seat that he occupies is big. So it's not the person, it's the position that he represents. Chassidei Chabad, and that lives on. And it's up to us to make sure it lives on. So Hey Tevis is a day of resolutions and actions in acquiring Sfarim, learning Sfarim, increasing whatever we've done to increase in more of that. And with that, we go with perfect segue into the first sefer of all Chassidus Chabad, which is the Torah Shebiksav of Chassidus Tanya. So we'll continue where we left, which is concluding basically chapter 23. The essence of the chapter, and continuing the themes from the previous chapter, especially starting from chapter 20, is how Anochi Hashem Elokecha, godliness, and God, the unity of God, is the basis of the whole Torah. All the mitzvahs are encompassed in that one commandment. Achdus Hashem. Why is that so relevant? Because as he explained earlier, because when you know that, then Korev Elecha Dover Ma'ed, you recognize, not just in a time of emergency, like he explains in chapter 18 and 19. Well, every neshama, every Jew, even someone, a Kal Shabakalim, a Pesha Yisrael, someone who's not on the level of contemplating, Daitek Tzari, is unable to contemplate on the divine and arouse or awaken an emotion, even a so-called emotion sensing that this is the right thing to do, even if he doesn't have a full-bodied feeling. Talumis libe, as we learned. So even a person like that, when push comes to shove, you say to him, either bow to an idol or we'll kill you. A Jew will be Meiser Nefesh, as we explained in those chapters. But that's in the case of emergency. We sense that Achdus Hashem is being threatened. What about not in that case? But now we understand that Achdus Hashem is a reality in all of existence all the time. And it's through mitzvahs and Torah that we experience that reality. So the level of contemplation depends on each individual. But the fact remains that not just in a time of danger, or crisis, or like I said, with an emergency situation, but it's all the time, and therefore all the mitzvahs encompass that idea of God's presence in this world. Why don't we feel it? Because of the concealments, the tzimtzumim. So that's why we're given mitzvahs, Torah and mitzvahs. Because Torah and mitzvahs are divine vehicles that are given to us in this concealed world, where the divine is concealed, that are not subject to concealment, to hester panav. So first mitzvah, he starts saying, Torah is Araisav Kudsha B'richu Kul Echad. Torah and Hashem are one. Mitzvahs is Evarim de Malka. They are, the Ramach mitzvah says, the 248 positive mitzvahs are the 248 organs of the king. And he goes on to explain the organs of the king are one with the king. So mitzvahs manifest this unity. And even more so in Torah, like he explained. Because in Torah, firstly, from the human level, you're not just engaging Maisa, Lvusha Maisa, the garment of action, but also the garment of speech, thought and speech, when you learn Torah. And additionally, it's not just Evarim de Malka. Because halacha in Torah, every halacha, is that who, he says, is the Tzein of Chachmasi Yisbarach. You're now becoming more than just a vehicle. Like he says about mitzvahs, you're a vehicle, like a merkava. You are manifesting while you're learning Torah, Datzim Chachma Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the unity is far deeper. And it's also a far higher level of the divine revelation, like he explains afterwards, Seviv Kalam. That's higher even than the divine revelation in the higher worlds. And then in the conclusion of this chapter, he brings it into call to action, so to speak. What are the implications of this, of learning Torah? That it evokes, when a person, like he said, when a person learns Torah, he says, from this, the maskil, and we'll soon explain why he says maskil like we learned. Actually, I should begin earlier. Ubezeh, he said, one second. Ubezeh Yuvan, he said, Lama Godla, Ma'oid Mailas Esek B'Teri Yesem Kol HaMitzvahs. We'll understand the greatness of Torah more than all the mitzvahs, even from tefillah, from davening, because of what we just said. And then he continues, Ubezeh Yuchal HaMaskil. The wise one can use this, become inspired with a great sense of evidence, Yira Gedela. Because when you contemplate, how a person's soul and his garments, in his mind and in his mouth, are completely united with the Ratzon Elyon. You're learning Torah, you're like basically manifesting God's will. Not just implementing it through a mitzvah. I don't want to use the word just. That's the Evarim, and you're a vehicle when you give tzedakah. But you're actually manifesting the very Ratzon Elyon, and the Erein Seh Baruch Hu Mamish, HaMizgal B'hem, that's revealed, that all the higher and lower worlds cannot manifest. So that, in turn, evokes a tremendous yirah, a tremendous reverence, because you look what you're doing. You're not just, we're not talking about being active in menial matters or mundane matters, even in sublime matters. You are becoming essentially manifesting during that learning Torah godliness. And that's what Torah does, and that's the pasuk way. Tzivenu Hashem es kol hachukim ha'elu yirus Hashem. We're not talking about the lower level of yirah, reverence that leads to Torah mitzvahs. Here we're talking about how Torah leads you to this higher level of reverence because you're learning Torah in this fashion, manifesting. And that's what the Mishnah says in Ovis, im ein chachma ein yirah. Alter Rebbe mechadish, ein chachma ein yirah, talking not to, because the first part of the Mishnah, ein yirah ein chachma, the second half, I should say, is talking about the lower level of yirah. The yira you need, reverence that prepares you, because you revere God. That's why you follow His Torah and mitzvahs. But now, ein chachma and yira means if you don't have chachma of Torah, you don't have yira gdela. This yira gdela zu, we say ein chachma and yira. And the Torah is called Tara Ledarta, like a shar, a gate, a gateway to the dwelling. Because Torah is leading you to this higher level of reverence, which is so negated to this chapter and to the whole section, because you're talking about manifesting divine unity in the fullest sense of the word. But now, the Alter Rebbe Bavaron is the final lines in Tanya. He comes to qualify, because then the question is, the whole point of this was after chapter 7:16. Till then, he was talking about someone who can contemplate and awaken emotions within him and connect to God. Because naturally, a person controls his heart. So through contemplation, he can control. Even someone who's unable to reach galus libe, emotions is galus libe, reaches talumis libe, meaning emotions that tell him, I don't feel the love, but I feel enough to know it's the right thing to do. And it brings, therefore, that the belavavcha is enough to bring to lasese, as he explained in chapter 16. But in chapter 17, and chapter 16 and 17, but chapter 18 rather, he began to say, what about someone who's not even able to do that? So he says there's ava misoteris within each one of us, without any contemplation. And which we see emerges in a time of challenge and crisis. But now he's saying that really you can access that all times. When you understand that it manifests Torah mitzvahs, God's unity in this concealed world. But now we're saying that you need to think about that. So you're back to contemplation. So we discussed in previous classes that the Alter Rebbe is not negating, once he starts chapter 18 and on, 18, 19, you could say he's talking about everyone, obviously. Specifically the Peshis Kal Shabakal and Peshis Yisrael. But as he continues on in chapter 20 and on, about Dibur and understanding that, clearly he's talking to everyone, not just to the person who only has Ava Misoteris, also to someone who can contemplate. So you have the best of both worlds. The natural love of Ava Misoteris and the contemplation both earlier, before chapter 18, up till the end of chapter 17, but now also this contemplation. And this already depends on each person's level. So the minimum, let's say Kal Shabakal and Peshis Yisrael, you could say the fact is that divine unity is all the time there, and at least they need to be informed of that. And by being informed that when they do Torah and mitzvahs, they manifest that divine unity, just like in a time of crisis when they feel the threat. Each person according to their level. But now we've moved to a place where you're saying hamaskil. That's what he says, hamaskil. That's clearly, you're talking about hamaskil. So you're back to now a higher level. And as I said, the Alter Rebbe is not negating the higher level. So he's explaining that this idea that Torah manifests God's unity in the fullest sense of the word, especially a maskil will appreciate it to the point it will bring him to Yira Gdela. So now in the last lines, the Alter Rebbe bavorns this. What does he tell us? El dolav kol meichel sovelda Yira kazu. This higher level of reverence is not every mind can contain or can hold. This is an expression from Tikkun Zeyar. This level of Yira. That doesn't mean you can't have any Yira, but this level of Yira, not every mind can contain or hold. Which tells us that someone that can appreciate, when they do appreciate what Torah is, will come to this highest level of reverence. Because you're literally, as you're learning Torah, you become like a new person. You're not the person who's involved in worldly matters. Even beheted, even permissible. So then why are we discussing it if it's not for everyone? Tanya's Karev Elach Hadav Meid Befichel B'Vav Chala Seisei. even for a Kal Shebekalim and Peishi Yisrael, and even for someone who may not have the capacity to contemplate, like he said at the beginning of chapter 18. So literally those words. I want to read the exact words. Let's read the exact words together. This, by the way, doesn't mean a Kal Shebekam. That's someone who is on Peishi Yisrael, obviously on a lower level. But he's saying if someone that doesn't have Daitik Tzara, to give birth to real emotions. So how's that apply here when we say the maskil is the one? So that's what he says. However, even if your mind cannot contain this level of reverence, this Yira Gdela, neither a part of it nor a fraction of it. So he's emphasizing even more. You're not just you don't contain, not even a drop of it. You're completely, because he's going back, because we have to say this is all relevant to everyone. Elech korav elecha. Why? And why can he not? Is leminav lemiksasa? It's due to the fact due to the poor standing or the lower standing of the person's soul at its root and source. The madregas tachtein is the esses spheres. In the lower echelons of the 10 spheres, the Asiya, of the world of Asiya. Like we learned earlier, that Neshamis, they all originate in the highest levels, but then they come through and they retain and assume the properties of the lower levels. So this type of Neshamis are not capable. Not because of lack of Avodah. They're just not capable. So he's even including. Lack of Avodah, you could say, so work harder. But even if not, your Neshama is there. So Ein Yirazu Me'akeves Be'lamaisa. Nevertheless, the failure to reach this higher level of reverence does not in any way invalidate the person's Avodah, Lamaisa, his observance. Kafishe is Bar Lakaman, as will be explained later in chapter Mem Aleph, page 41, chapter 41. So you see here that every person, when he learns Torah and does a mitzvah, even if it's on an actual level, is manifesting that divine unity. Because the mitzvah, bottom line, is Evar and the Malka. And Torah is a Reis v'Kutshabrichu Kul Echad. It's not so even if he can't contemplate and appreciate the full reverence, or even not the full, even even a drop of it, so the lack of this level of reverence does not stop him from doing mitzvahs. So he's aware of it. That's why we learn about it. And that awareness tells you that's what Torah mitzvahs are. Even if you don't fully understand it or don't understand it at all, to the point that it brings such reverence. And with that he concludes chapter 23. And with here we'll stop. A good tavach, a good yontif. TanyaApplied.com, where you can find this and all the previous programs.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.